If you want to get better at taking photos in 2025 and start a photography business, then keep watching, because in this video, I'm sharing my top 3 tips for how to take better photos, edit them consistently, and get them to a place where you feel confident charging for a photo shoot. So keep watching if you're ready to start shooting consistently and interested in starting a photography business. So maybe you're interested in photography or you love photography and you just want to take some better photos, you want to get better at it, and you're like, how do I even do this? So my first piece of advice would be to get yourself a camera if you don't already have one. If you're interested in getting better as a photographer and maybe one day starting a business, you need to get a nice camera. Now, it doesn't have to be the most expensive camera. It doesn't have to be the $5,000 camera. In fact, you can get started for as little as like $500. You can get a really nice camera. And in 2025, if you can, I would recommend getting a mirrorless camera, because that is the future of photography. So get yourself a mirrorless camera. Now, I've received questions before about like, so how do you even get good? How do you learn about photography? How do you take better photos? The secret to getting better at taking photos, at getting better at photography, it's not really a secret, but you could invest in some courses. You could take some classes, like at a community college. You can take some courses online. Creativelive.com is a really great resource for that. However, I will say that the fastest way to get better at taking photos and honing your photography skills is to practice. I know that probably sounds like kind of a boring answer, to just practice, but really that is the best way for you to figure out how to use your camera. And if you really want to learn how to use your camera well, I recommend that you put it on manual. So what does that mean? Putting your camera on manual means you have complete control over all of the settings, from aperture to shutter speed to your ISO, which if you don't know what any of that is, then that's why you need to practice with your camera. Because yes, your camera is poised to take pretty good photos on auto, but if you want to eventually start a photography business and start charging people for a photo shoot, then you need to know how to work your camera. What does practicing look like? There's that quote that it takes like 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. So have you put in 10,000 hours into practicing your photography skills? If you haven't, we all start somewhere, right? So practicing can look as simple as taking your camera out and photographing some trees, some plants, some flowers. It can be photographing your kids, your friends' kids, your nieces and nephews. It could be taking your camera with you when you go out. It's a little windy. Go out to a restaurant and photographing your food. There's all kinds of different scenarios where you can practice with your camera, and that's prime time for you to figure out what all of your settings do. This would be a good time to get out your camera manual. I know, I said get out a camera manual, or look it up online. I don't even think they come in the box anymore. So look it up online to look, read, and see how your camera works. Now, does that sound super basic to just be like, oh yeah, look up your camera manual, figure out how your camera works? But really, that's one of the major keys to improving your photography and getting it to a level where you can charge for photo shoots. Because let me tell you, as someone who's been a photographer for 15 years, I see photographers all the time who are charging for photo shoots, but personally, I don't think their work is very good. It's all personal opinion. But if they just made a couple of tweaks, they could improve their photos astronomically. Because what you don't want to do once you get at a good place with your photography is to go into a photo shoot and not fix your settings, not adjust your settings, not adjust the people in the photo, not adjust your subjects to get the best results possible, but instead just thinking to yourself, oh, I'll fix it later in post. I'll fix it later in editing. That is a professional photographer's famous last words. Usually it turns into a bigger editing problem, editing challenge, when it could have just been a matter of turning someone or changing a pose or just adjusting a color, whatever the case may be. Practice exposing correctly so that when you do go edit, it is easy and simple. So another way to practice your photography skills that's going to come in handy, especially if you want to eventually start a photography business, is to work with the light. Go out in the middle of the day, go out when it's close to sunset, go out early in the morning, see where the light is, where it lands, and how you like to take your photos. So I would say that there's a whole school of photographers who recommend that you shoot during golden hour, and golden hour is that 2 hour, 1.5 hours before sunset. And usually the light is nice and golden and pretty. And yes, I would suggest that too. I used to photograph at that time all the time before, and it was my safety zone. But here's the thing, is that you won't always be able to shoot in ideal times. So it's best to practice in all kinds of lighting scenarios, in full sun, in full shade, in half shade. Figure out where to stand, where to move, and how to get optimal lighting no matter the situation. When you're first starting out in photography, you're probably still figuring out your editing preferences. You're figuring out how to edit, period, end of sentence. I would get yourself a subscription to Lightroom. There is a photographer bundle with Adobe that's specifically just Lightroom and Photoshop, and figure out how to use Lightroom. There's a bunch of tutorials on YouTube. There's also courses and other resources for figuring out how to use it. The key is to figure out your editing style and stick to it, because what I see a lot of newer photographers is that they're experimenting a lot, which is cool, because I look back at my first photos and they were definitely, I would call them experimental, because the color was all kinds of a little bit crazy. But we all start somewhere, and you'll eventually find the style that you like. And I personally would stay away from trendy type editing. I would stick to kind of true to life or light and airy or actual colors that occur in nature. Personally, I don't prefer the dark and moody. I don't prefer the browns and extra goldens, if you know what I'm talking about. Some people do, that's cool. But when you're first starting out in photography, I'd recommend kind of figuring out your style and sticking to something that's not so hard to edit, something that doesn't require presets. Because yes, presets can save you time, but presets shouldn't figure out your editing for you. If you want to get better at photography and you've been thinking about starting a photography business, at what point do you figure out if you're good enough to start charging for your photography? It's a loaded question. At what point do you just start? Well, here's the thing, is that if you want to start a photography business, you can post it on social media that you're starting to offer photo shoots, and see what the interest is. See, if anybody is oh, cool, you're shooting now. Will you photograph my family? If there is demand, then you could be the supply. And if you're feeling kind of well, am I good enough to charge? If they're showing interest, you are. Now, how much? That's a different story and a different video. But once you are accepting money for a photo shoot, you can essentially count yourself in business. If you're ready to formally start your business, I have a little checklist in the description below, so you should go check that out. It's free. The name of the game when it comes to starting a photography business for most, amateur or hobbyist photographers who want to go professional is to simply start. It's usually a matter of like confidence. How do I feel about this? And then just kind of like figuring it out as you're flying the plane. So if you're ready to dip your toes into a proverbial pond of starting a photography business, I would recommend start sharing your work, start sharing your practice sessions, start sharing the photos that you've taken, share them on social media, on places like Instagram and Facebook, anywhere where you have others who would be interested in your work and are local to you, and see what happens. I'm willing to bet that at the very least, you'll get some feedback, you'll get some nice comments, and that will actually help you propel you forward to practice more, explore if you want to eventually take on clients, and you'll just get better and better with every time that you practice. If you just sit there and look at your camera and just think about taking photos but never actually press the shutter, you're never going to get any better. So this is my encouragement to you. Be sure, if you want to actually get better at taking photos with your camera, practice. Practice, practice, practice. It's free, it's simple, you can do it every single day. And when you practice, you'll get better. You'll understand how your camera works. You'll start to understand where to position your subjects in relation to the sun. You'll start to understand how to edit consistently so that you can eventually start charging whenever you decide to start that photography business. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.